Hi everyone, Ryan here. What you're about to hear is one of the very first episodes we ever recorded, which is why some of the time frames and references would make more sense in episodes 2 or 3 than it does in episode 14. In case you're listening in order, that's why some of it might not make sense. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Compelling stories are not hard to find. You just need to know where to look. Join your hosts, Dr. Eric Shaw, Prosecutor Ryan Frank, writer Adrian Bonenberger, and comedian Ryan Connor, as they interview ordinary people about their extraordinary experiences. This is Baggage.
Oh, God, love that theme song. Welcome to the Baggage Podcast. I am Ryan Connor. I am the person who is not qualified to be here at all. With me, Dr. Eric Shaw, pediatrician, former EMT. Hello, Eric.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty great. Also, we have Adrian Bonenberger, infantryman, former infantryman, editor of the Yale publication. No,
you
it's
can
not
just
Yale.
say writer and journalist for me. That's always going to be accurate.
Adrian Bonenberger, journalist and writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And also we have Ryan Frank, who normally does this job, but today he thought he would be a glory hog if he hosted and told stories. Because he's unfamiliar with media, apparently, and doesn't know that that's how everything works. Ryan Frank is a prosecutor in Virginia. He's a former Marine Corps helicopter guy, not the pilot, the other one. He did 2 tours in Iraq, Sunni Triangle stuff. I think that's about it. I think he'll tell you the rest. Ryan, how did that sound?
That was way better than I could have done. You got 90% of the facts correct. You got almost everyone's name pronounced correctly. Almost. And it was just well done. Well done. That was fun to watch.
Adrian, did I butcher your last name?
Bonenberger.
Whose name did I? Oh, Bon. I always say Bone.
You know,
Bon makes, that's a good switch.
I think it's an Ellis Island thing. I think, that my ancestor came in there and they were like, it's Bonenberger. And some dude was like, how do you spell an A and an H together? An O, obviously, and I'll throw an E at the end of the end. That'll make everything okay.
So far, there is nothing to edit. This is staying as is.
Perfect.
I'm not changing anything. So a little unusual to be in this position. I'm usually more comfortable asking the questions than answering the questions. And I was talking to Eric before we did this episode, and I'm not sure really what people are interested in with my job. So please interject with questions. But so I left the Marine Corps, did another job for a few years, and then went to law school and have been a prosecutor since I graduated for, almost 12 years ago. And it is the coolest job in the world. I love it. I mean, when you do something you love, I remember, Eric on another episode was sharing how he was struggling with his choice in the medical career at one point, doing some of the EMT stuff. And it's pretty traumatic. That's a whole different ball game. So I don't really have that experience, but I love it. I love working with law enforcement, collaborating with law enforcement. When a detective investigates a crime or a road deputy investigates a crime and they decide to get charges, a lot of times they do that for public safety. They gotta arrest the person. They gotta move quickly, but there's still some more investigation to do. So it's very collaborative of like working together, and some of the best people I've ever met and worked with. So that's pretty satisfying. I focus on child victim crimes. So, you see on TV, it's true, they categorize stuff in different types of crimes. So law enforcement does this, and prosecutors kind of fit in those boxes too, of like larceny, theft, fraud stuff. That's one box. And then you have narcotics, you have robbery, homicide. And then some people refer to it as special victims. We don't, but it's the juvenile victims or defendants, and sex crimes, all those things. That's kind of my focus and has been pretty much since I started early on. I started getting some of those cases and have focused on those, and they can be a little tough sometimes. So I think the ones that really stick out in my mind, the early ones and the ones that they go to trial.
Can I ask, like, when you start practicing, are you straight into that field, or is it like, do you do like is there a legal equivalent to like medical rotations where you're sort of all over the board and stuff, or how does that work?
It varies so much between offices, different states, and even within an office, they'll change policies from time to time. So it really varies quite a bit. Some people will just start with misdemeanors, and they can't get out of the misdemeanor court until they have been practicing for so long. And the way our office does it is it's called vertical prosecution. You get a case when it's charged and you follow it all the way through, which is really good for victim-centric crimes because then they're not getting bounced around from prosecutor to prosecutor. They deal with the same person the whole time. So it's a good way to do it. Me personally, I started in a very experienced office. So everyone was pretty busy, knew what they needed to do. So I just kind of was thrown into it and kind of like figure it out. So I was doing some pretty serious cases within the first year or so. With oversight, anybody in the office I could go to ask questions. Part of it, I didn't know what questions to ask, kind of. So there was a little stumbling when I got started, but very much a trial by fire where within the first year I was doing, I probably had my first jury trial within a year. Certainly within the first year and a half, I was doing child sexual assault jury trials where it's like a 9-10-year-old victim and you got to get them ready to testify and stuff. And I got that job right out of law school. So it was pretty much, I jumped right into it.
Now, my familiarity with like the in the courtroom stuff is pretty low. Is it like the TV where there's like multiple prosecutors, like kind of on a team together, or is it you do this and you're kind of leading the charge the whole way?
Again, varies by office, but most places there's just the volume is enough, it's high enough that you really can't put multiple prosecutors on a single case for the vast majority of them. Maybe homicides, maybe like serious cases like that. I had an entire family of daughters was basically being sexually assaulted by their father. That's just a lot of witnesses. Those five victims. So that's a lot of witnesses. So you'll split something like that up. Or a homicide will also often get two people if just for the fact that it's homicide. But most of the time you get a case and you follow it and it's all you. Every proceeding you're pretty much by yourself.
Was it really tough when you start just like intimidating, knowing, like, especially when you first started, just knowing, oh, tomorrow these victims and their families are depending on me, and this is something I'm new at.
It's terrifying.
Yeah,
it's terrifying. Yeah, I mean, I had interned for 2 years, 2 summers. I had interned in the office, so I had watched a lot of court. I had seen a lot of court. But when you have to get up there and you're the only person at the table and you have to talk, you just brain dump. You're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And it took a while. I mean, I've been, I think anybody that's in a job for long enough, you see some of the same stuff. I feel pretty comfortable now that I can kind of walk into a case and figure out what to do with it. Certainly a lot quicker than when I first started. I should also preface this, now that we're this far in, so that people don't turn off the episode. I recognize what a lot of triggers are for people. So even though I deal with child victim sexual assault cases, I'm not going to be getting into any details with any specific case.
Allegedly, because when they're defendants, of course, they have yet to be convicted and innocent until proven guilty.
I'm going to be talking about all the guilty guys today because all of them are convictions. I won't talk about a case that wasn't a conviction. And also, it's interesting, the way I always viewed that was like innocent until proven guilty. Innocent until you know what the facts are, right? I've read the police report. I know what the facts are. They're guilty to me. But I can say, with a clean conscience that I've never gone to trial on a case where, did this guy do it or not? Like that doesn't really, in my opinion, doesn't really happen. If I have any reasonable doubt, I'm not prosecuting the case. Man, where to start? Well, see, as I mentioned, I interned at the office, and now I do a lot of the child pornography prosecutions. But no one goes to law school saying, man, you know what? I want to get into child porn. Like that, that's not really a field that people kind of seek. You kind of are assigned to it. So my first exposure to it was I was interning and my boss was like, hey, the defense attorney needs to review this evidence, but you can't physically turn over child. That's a crime. You can't give child pornography to someone else to walk out of the office with. So she had to sit down, and there was 40 counts. It was hundreds and hundreds of images and videos and things like that, as there are in most of these cases. So she had to sit there with me. I had never seen anything like this before. And it was, I'll just say, bad, the bad stuff. She didn't want to be there, but she felt an ethical obligation that if I'm going to have my guy plead guilty to X many counts or whatever, I got to make sure that without a doubt, that is you've satisfied that element of the crime. So yeah, so for, I don't know, probably a few hundred images, because some of them were like borderline, who knows how old that person was, but some of them were very, very clear. So it was shocking. As an intern, I'm in law school. I'd never seen anything like this before, but obviously it left an impression because that was 14 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. It's like, oh my gosh, that's some images that I'll just never get out of my head. So then, when I ended up doing the job and I got hired in full-time prosecutor, there was one particular case that possession of child pornography that went to trial. Very rare for those charges to go to trial because usually it's very fact specific and very technical with the computer data. It's like you got them behind the computer, downloaded on this day. Like it's not a whodunit. But this one guy wanted to go to trial, and I have a technical background. So we had mentioned before, Eric and I went to high school together. He dated girls in high school. I learned computers. So I have a pretty good computer background, and that became known to the office. So I was kind of like a technical advisor on the child porn, because it was like, they're saying he downloaded this and it would have left this marker, but they don't find it. And, that kind of like nitty gritty stuff. And I was like, no, that's not true. I could speak the same language. And I got to tell you, it is pretty rewarding to get convictions for these cases, and just to know not only the legal aspect of it, but the technical aspect of it to get a conviction. But sometimes those do go to trial. And that's why if you're a prosecutor, hopefully you're motivated by the prospect of being able to do a jury trial, because that's the most fun aspect of it.
I got a quick question, which is, in your estimation, you've seen this stuff, these people who are basically abstractions to me. To the best of my knowledge, I've never met somebody who is into child pornography. It is unthinkable. Is this something where these people are like, they think they're not going to get caught, or it's like a compulsion for them? Is it like a disease, or are they just evil people? I mean, like, what is it with child, these pedophiles, I guess is the term for them?
Well, a couple things about that. I feel like I would also kind of put him in the category of pedophiles. Actually, you got to watch yourself in court saying that, because technically, if you don't have evidence that they actually have hurt a kid physical contact, right? But they certainly swim in the same pond. I don't have a good answer for that, because you say you don't know anybody that peddles in child pornography. You've met them. It is so prevalent and it's so out there. You've met them and you didn't know it. And it is
so prevalent,
really shocking. Like it is
like
it's so prevalent.
Really?
Oh yeah. That one thing I can't get into, I'm not going to get into, is law enforcement tactics, what they do and how they catch people, because obviously this is not how to be a pedophile podcast. I'll leave that to or something. But
it's a great episode title.
Yeah. I should probably bleep that name. Actually, I don't want to get sued this early on. I think that I know this. Law enforcement has told me this. You could double, triple the amount of law enforcement officers focused on trying to catch people that peddle in child pornography, and that they would have full-time jobs too. They do what they can, but it's fish in a barrel when they want to go out and catch them.
It's just that it takes resources to prosecute. So you can only prosecute
Right.
as many
You
as
need
you
law
have.
enforcement. Yeah, you need a law enforcement officer sitting behind a computer doing the work.
Can I ask a
And
question?
it's just
Are most of these people making it or something, or is it distribution or just like consumption? Because if it's consumption, it seems like they're probably coming from a handful of places, right? So that, I mean, it seems like those places could just be monitored and you know who's doing this, right?
so. Yeah, the vast majority of prosecutions are people that are downloading,
Okay.
right? And what you'll see is a lot of the same stuff over and over again. In fact, the federal government is able to tag those. I won't get into the technical aspect of it, but without looking at the images, you can tell from the metadata, basically. That's not true, but for ease of conversation, you can tell very quickly, boom, these 20 things are known child pornography. So there's a lot of repeat stuff out there. And it's so who the people are getting prosecuted are sometimes the people that create it, but most often the people that are downloading it. So the perception sometimes can be they're just downloading. They're not the ones hurting the kids. And I don't subscribe to that philosophy. And there's some studies out there that they've taken people that have been convicted of possession of child pornography and they've interviewed them and then polygraphed them and given them immunity or whatever they've done with the study and found that upwards of 85% of the people convicted of possession of child pornography have been hands-on with the kid in the past and just not prosecuted. So this idea that you find somebody and they just downloaded thousands of child pornography, they're not a risk, is a falsehood. Now that study was challenged and others have done studies to say, no, it's closer to 20%. Okay, that's a really big number, right? So this idea that it is way less concerning from individuals that just download, quote, just download. I take those cases pretty seriously because I know that there is a serious public safety risk.
Yeah, and you could also argue that just downloading it creates a market for it too. So
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Or just the slippery slope of like that's where it started and it kind of piqued their interest and then they're going to go from there. I mean, doesn't a lot of crime kind of work that way?
I mean, a lot of the people that get arrested for family relationship or neighbor or whatever, sexual assault of a child, when you seize the evidence and you get their electronics, they'll also have child pornography as well. Not surprisingly.
So are there any, you've been doing this for a while now, you've been doing it for years. Are there any like, what's the term I'm looking for? Not stereotype. Stereotype is the bad version of this, but are there any sort of generalizations that you've started to make about this? You look at, most of the people that come in, you're like, oh yeah, gas station attendant, that one was obvious, like always the gas station attendants, or political affiliations or religious affiliation.
It runs the gambit. Really is one of those crimes that really runs the gambit from the poor to the wealthy, kind of like white collar for sure. Ethnicity runs the gambit, really from all types of races and ethnic backgrounds. Gender, way more male than female. But other than that, yeah, it really is. There is no set, oh yeah, I saw that one coming. You do have ones once in a while where you see their mugshot and you're like, okay, that looks like a guy that would do that. But most of the time, you can't tell. You can't tell by looking at them for sure.
Is it offensive that I'm surprised there are any women doing it? Is that sexist that I thought women couldn't be pedophiles like that?
Now, actual sexual assault of juveniles, women for sure. We've prosecuted women for sure.
Right.
Some really disturbing ones. Mother, son, asleep kind of stuff.
Oh my God.
Juvenile son. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So again, I won't give details, but yeah, some pretty disturbing stuff.
Oh my God.
Ryan, I know this is your episode. I don't want to jump in too much, but I just had one kind of funny aside story from med school. When I did my psych rotation, I was at the Central State Mental Institute Forensic Wing. These are the people that were too crazy to stand trial at the moment. And we had a guy that was in there that was, I think he was suicidal at that point, and probably had good reason to be so. But he was brought up on, I think, pedophilia or child porn charges. And he looked just like the comic book guy from The Simpsons. Like he even had like the little vest and the bald hair with the ponytail. And he, we didn't really go into what he did, but we were reviewing the file and it was rather upsetting. And my attending and I, once the guy left, were like, that guy is not going to have a good time in jail. And that's kind of one of those kind of karmic justice things is, generally in prison, these guys get a severe comeuppance.
It's funny you mentioned that the guy that kind of fits the profile. So I had one jury trial that sticks out in my mind for possession of child pornography. Again, they're rare, but this guy wanted to go to trial, so went to trial. And the facts were that he rented his house and he lived in the basement, and the basement had some kind of communal thing. I don't know if it was a laundry or something. Something was in the basement. He gets arrested one day for something completely unrelated, and he's out of the house because he's taken to jail or whatever. And when he's taken to jail, he's got his phone with him. Well, while he's in jail, the guy that's renting from him goes downstairs, ends up bumping his computer, takes a screensaver off, and looks, and he's like, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of child porn like up on the screen. So he calls law enforcement. Law enforcement comes, takes all this stuff. And they find child pornography. And some of the child pornography they find, there's one or more images also on his phone in his personal effects at jail. Looks pretty good. It's the login on the computer is his user login, the same child pornography is on his phone. So at trial, the defense was that's a communal computer that everyone has my login, and it's a communal phone. It's a cell phone that I put in the center of the room. But I password locked it, but everyone has the password, right? So he paraded a bunch of his friends up there that they all know the password. And the defense was it could be and probably was his I think 14-year-old son. Which is just pretty deplorable. His 14-year-old son should be charged with these charges. It shouldn't be me. So he puts up all these witnesses, and the defense attorney was a really nice guy, super easy to deal with. And he can't run criminal record checks. He has to go by somebody's word, basically. So he calls up the defendant's best friend, and he goes up there and he testifies, and he says, now a number of witnesses had already testified about the password for this phone. So he gets up there, like, without asking a question, he goes, the password of the phone was 0638. And the jury almost kind of like snickered, like, okay, this is a little rehearsed. And he looked a little bit like the guy from the Simpsons with the ponytail and all that. And he looked like, if anybody did this, it's probably this guy, right? He's talking about his relationship with the defendant, and it's my turn to cross-examine him. And I know his criminal record. So I say, okay, so you say you're friends with the defendant, best friends. You talk a lot? Yes. Share a lot of the same interests? Yes. You're into some of the same things? Yes. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? I don't know. Okay. If I showed you your criminal record, would that help remind you? Maybe. I show it to him, and he says something like, I don't know. Oh yeah, I was convicted of marijuana. I was convicted of grand larceny. He's listing his criminal record that I don't care about, not that part. And I was like, what about this one? Oh yeah, having indecent liberties with a child. Okay. So a felony sex offense. Yeah. Okay. The defendant's best friend. The defendant's head is in his hands. The defense attorney's like, oh my God, what is this? Right. So closing arguments were the defense attorney, who knows who's downloading this child porn? Look, maybe it was his friend, and he points into him in the back, and the friend runs out into the bathroom and starts throwing up because he thinks he's about to be charged with possession of child pornography. But the jury did not believe the defense version and ended up convicting him. But yeah, so sometimes that was kind of a funny one where like, he's like, he's feeling so confident. He's like, I'm going to have all these people come up. But it really is, most of them are pretty common sense.
What's like a typical sentence for someone with who's downloaded a bunch or versus someone who's created it, if you've prosecuted that? I don't know.
So yeah, those are very, very different sentences. The vast majority of those cases, I'll make a charging offer and let the judge do the sentencing. And it varies. I mean, you could have a guy that's 75 years old. Are you going to give him a 40-year sentence? Maybe. Depends on what he was downloading, what he was doing. And is it a couple images, or is it libraries where he's like categorizing them and you can tell he's sharing it with others? It really runs the gambit from a few years to over 10 years. And that is just my experience, because I think we prosecute those cases as a public safety concern. Other jurisdictions might take different approaches and not view it as serious.
It's interesting. I wonder if, to me, and I think probably for the reasons intuitively that you were getting at, which is that there's a great correspondence between the child porn and pedophilia. There's very little distinction between those two things in my mind. Then I think about, like, you go online these days, and it's not just like the child pornography, but the infantilization and sexualization of stuff like seems to skew pretty young. And I think about the anime stuff, like you go on Twitter and like half of the people, seem to have these like anime, profiles where they're sort of, and I mean, like you watch anime and especially the stuff coming out in the 80s and 90s is like, it's borderline child pornography. And in Japan, they actually have a very different relationship with that stuff. Different cultures view that stuff differently. I don't think any culture celebrates it. No, that's not exactly right. In Afghanistan, they have this thing called bakabazi or boy play, which is repellent and is, pedophilia. But I think mainstream, most cultures don't actually, look at that with admiration or respect. They look at it with opprobrium as well. They should. But there is a distinction between pedophilia and child pornography. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you see kids, whatever, teenagers, young adults, and they sort of like idolize anime, and the anime is somewhat sexualized, and the anime is talking about, teenagers, and you're like, all right. I mean, like what kind of a society is that building us up to be, right? Isn't that encouraging it in the long run? Isn't that, having a teenager think, that's the kind of sexual framework I've got, is these sort of cartoon characters, and then looking for it in later life? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a couple of points. First of all, the cultural thing is interesting because as far as child pornography, I personally have not seen it more prevalent in one community over another, and where culture could be a reason for that. Sexual assaults, absolutely. I do see just not taken very seriously by, and not viewed as a crime by some cultural, with people with some cultural backgrounds. And even where the victim and the family are very upset, as upset as any family member would be, it still is more prevalent in certain cultures. And I'm not going to highlight any, I'm not going to disparage any particular culture.
I mean, do you ever just get like, another case where you just get excited that it's not something like that, and you're like, oh God, it's just a kid who got slapped or something. You know what I mean?
I mean, I get those too. It's usually, I'll say this, the prosecuting the child pornography of all the categories I'm talking about is some of the least stressful and least harmful to my mental health. I'll say it that way, because even though somebody has downloaded thousands of images, I don't look at thousands of images on a daily basis, right? It's usually plea offers are, rejected. We're heading for trial, or we're going to have a hearing, and I got to, argue a bond, and how bad is this one? Then I have to, look at some of it, and that sucks. But on the whole, it's more of I'm dealing with paperwork. I'm dealing with procedure. I'm dealing with charging decisions and things like that. And these are 100% real live victims that have been victimized, but that photo could be 15 years old. I'm never going to have a direct interaction with that person. What affected me in a much more significant way is the real in-person victims that I deal with. For example, when I started out, I was talking about doing some jury trials early on, and within a year, I had a jury trial of my first child sexual assault case, and the victim was about 8 years old. It was tough, and she testified about what a family friend had done, and I'll never forget, she was very reluctant, and it was very difficult for trial preparation to get her to talk about it. And at the time, the laws changed, but at the time, the only way to prove it was, you little girl, get up on the stand and talk in detail about what happened. That's it. If you don't do that, he walks. I mean, there's just no other way. I didn't talk to her like that, but that's the reality of it. So she had a hard time, and I was concerned about her being able to say all the things that he had done. And she shows up to court, and I said, "Hey, how you doing today?" And she's got a little teddy bear, and she goes, "I got my bear today. I'm good. I'm ready." And I was like, "Oh, hold back the tears. Okay." So defense attorney was one of the rare minority of defense attorneys that are a snake in the grass, and the kind of like, when they try to portray nasty, sneaky defense attorneys, he was kind of one of those. Very rare, both defense attorneys, very professional, easy to deal with. This just happened to be a very difficult guy to deal with. He objected to everything. He objected to the little girl having a comfort item where the jury couldn't see it. Hold the little bear on her lap while she testified. He objected to that. Like, come on, man, what are you doing? Like that's not necessary. And he made it very difficult on her, but she did very well. I thought the evidence was very good. There's always a roll of the dice with the jury, and it was a not guilty. But one of the jurors had told one of the bailiffs after the fact that they believed her. They thought it happened, but what's the harm? Because they're never going to let him around her again. So they didn't think they had to convict. You can't account for that in a jury trial. You just don't know, what 12 people you're going to get. So that was a tough one. I remember going home to my wife, and that was a tough day.
I didn't realize that on the stand that the children had to do that, because when we do things from the medical standpoint of it, it's usually very nuanced. There's explicit child trauma advocates that will come into it, and they have a very scripted way of doing things. But like for me, if a kid comes into my office and said, hey, the parents are like, I think, somebody touched him or did something like that, I'm like, this is not my specialty. You need to go to the ER. And again, it's like a tactical team that does this. But I didn't realize that you guys have to go, that the victim themselves has to do it. I thought that a lot of that would be from previous testimony that they've given or recorded, but to make them get up in front of a courtroom like that just seems awfully traumatic for a child.
It is. And it's gotten so much better. So here's some law school 101. Anything other than the victim saying this happened to me is hearsay, right? That's an out-of-court statement. But there are exceptions to hearsay. So over the years, they've developed some. For example, this happens sometimes where in the course of a medical examination, I'm trying to figure out your medical condition. Can you tell me why you're here and why you think there might be a medical condition? Or so-and-so did this thing to me. That could be an exception that comes in. Possibly. A judge would have to rule on that. But that's not the kid testifying. That's a statement to medical personnel for diagnosis. And they've added something to the law in the last, I say few years, it's probably like 5-6 years old now, where you can take the child forensic interview. Law enforcement has really taken scientific evidence-based research and put it to use. And there's such a better way than a detective sitting down with a 6-year-old saying what happened. You get a professional, non-leading questions, let them tell their story, don't suggest the answer to them, and you record that. And when you record that, that most of the time can be admissible in court. Now, there's other rules, constitutional protections for defendants where you still might have to have the kid to come in to answer questions by the defendant, but if he wants to ask questions, or the defense counsel, or you could get a pretrial ruling that the kid is psychologically would be too traumatic and they would not be able to participate in the proceedings, so they'd be unavailable. This is getting a little into the weeds about the legal procedure, but there are mechanisms in place to make it much easier on the victim nowadays than it used to be. It's still tough. I mean, I had, I think 4 jury trials last year, all with kids that all of them involved the kid had to come to court and had to sit on the stand. And awesome, incredibly brave, very difficult, but they did it. And I like to think I see it, and it seems that they feel empowered by the end of it. They took back some of the power that this person had taken from them, but it's still hard, but it's gotten better, which also means more accountability for people that otherwise, the one I talked about, the not guilty. If we had recorded child forensic interviewing back then, almost certainly a different outcome, I think. When you hear it a couple times, you hear it clear in a controlled environment where they feel a safe place to talk about what happened. It just conveys a very different and very more detailed account of what the kid went through. So it's better. It's better now. So and that was one of the first ones I had to do. And I have done, unfortunately, dozens of cases like that over the years. And a couple of them, they're all tough, but a couple of them kind of stick out to me. One in which there was, she's probably about 13 or 14, and her dad was the defendant, trial prep. Hey, yeah, this happened. I don't want to testify, but I'm not going to lie. She got up on the stand in the middle of a jury trial and said, nope, he never touched me. And that's it. That's it. Case dismissed, And she went home with him that day. And that was tough because that's just something completely out of your control. And, she made a call, not going to judge her for it. I get it. She loves her dad. She knew the consequences, and she would rather be home with him than him not be there anymore. And that's something you always struggle with too, is that family dynamic.
Well, how old was she?
Especially like 13 or 14.
Because, even if she was terrified of him, he'd probably knew how to coerce his daughter into thinking that she wanted to be home,
Yeah, there was other pressures too. Other family members were telling her to
Right.
recant, to say it didn't happen. That kind of, we knew that was happening. So that's why I was talking with her. I was like, I know, your brother told you to X, Y, and Z. And she says, no, I'm going to tell the truth. But then, just once they're on the stand, it comes out of your mouth. I can't overcome that. You know what I'm saying? Now we don't have any evidence. So that kind of, that's
a weird
kind of
thing.
tough one.
Because I think about that with journalism too, with investigative journalism, the story is whatever people are willing to go on record with, like in some journalists will push hard for a story and get a story out and you can tell usually when you're reading it intuitively as a reader. I don't think it's just me because I'm a journalist, but like you read a thing and you're like, they didn't really get the goods on this. And that's because probably the person, did one interview or two interviews. And on the third interview, the journalist came back and the person was like, I can't do this. I can't fry this factory, even though I know they're doing something wrong, because it's also the factory that's employing the community or, some other thing that, is unethical. And that's something that I've wrestled with. It's interesting to hear you talk about this because it's like, yeah, at a certain point, there's the law. And then there's also like, if a person is like, well, no, there was no crime. There's no victim here. Then it's not the court's responsibility to step in and say, we have decided that there is a crime and there is a victim here. And therefore this is going to happen anyway, even though as outsiders, you want justice to happen. But yeah, that's really weird. That's really troubled.
Right. And it happens at the investigation stage too. So you'll have a little kid that'll tell their mom and dad are divorced or something like that, went over to dad's and comes home and says, dad did X, Y, and Z. Well, they'll be forensically interviewed and they don't say that in the forensic interview. They don't say any of that. And mom says, they told me that. Okay. But if they tell mom one time and they never say it again, there's not much we can do about that. If they've never disclosed, because how easy is that for a defense attorney to say the parents that have animosity against each other, she's making allegations, but she's never said this to anyone else. And so people ask me if I ever convicted an innocent person. No, I can say that with a straight face. But there have been a number that have clearly been guilty and walk free because we never had the evidence to charge in the first place, or we do charge, but then outside factors like family pressure comes in and it ends up being they sink the case or something like that, because it takes so many steps to get to court and then to convince 12 people that it happened. Those are the ones that go to trial. I mean, the majority of people plead guilty because guess what? They did it, right? So, but the perception of like it's so easy to get somebody accused of a crime and convicted of a crime. Come to court, man. Come to court and see what victims have to go through. I have never once been involved in a case where a sexual assault victim is like, let's go. When can we start? Can we come tomorrow? I want to testify. No, they really, the last thing they want on earth. I probably have 3 or 4 of them right now. They're like, as long as I never have to go to court, I'll tell you what happened, right? They don't want the person in trouble. They love them. I have one in particular, very upset that we charged it. Very upset. So it's you have a lot of obstacles to overcome. But then when you get to it and you get to the actual kid on the stand testifying, that's why I think I still love my job, even though it's really heavy topics and really, really terrible things that kids have gone through. I don't know what it is. I'm able to kind of compartmentalize, but I can't set aside when the kid's there and talking in detail about what happened. That's the moment for me where I'm like, whew, I gotta remember my job right now, keep my composure and ask the next question. And it's gotten tougher with kids. Because it's more.
Well, it's going to be my question for you is how has having kids affected and impacted your job?
I mean, when I have those trials, especially when the victims are around my kids' age, I feel even more satisfied with convictions, and I come home and I hug my kids a little tighter. My wife and I are incredibly paranoid about, all kinds of things. So we're very vigilant because we know what's out there. But again, I'm able to kind of set that aside, and I don't know what it is. I've never been able to kind of pinpoint why it doesn't really bother me that much. I have some idea, but almost like borderline, like, am I supposed to be a lot more bothered? I mean, why have I been doing this for years and I don't have nightmares? It does not, none of this keeps me awake. I sleep fine. So I kind of done some soul searching about why that is the way it is. It's not because I don't care. It's not because I don't have empathy, because clearly when I'm in court and the rubber meets the road and I'm talking to these kids, sometimes in trial prep too, when I'm learning new facts about the case, where the kid's kind of continues to disclose even more stuff, I got to keep a straight face. I said, okay, right. But internally I'm thinking, oh my God, like I need to take a break here. So through all of this, all the years I've been doing this, I can probably count on one hand the number of times where I'm like, this is so emotionally disturbing, I can't continue. And a couple of those, almost all of them, are when the kid's on the stand. One of my early ones, I was a couple years in, really tough case that some people thought I shouldn't have tried to prosecute because it was very difficult. She was assaulted by her uncle 7 years prior. There was some inconsistencies because she was 7, trying to remember what happened when she was 7. So you talk to a 7-year-old a week after something happens, they're not going to get the facts right? So you talk about a sexual assault 7 years later, there's going to be some inconsistencies. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, just some inconsistencies. What color was the room, that kind of stuff. So we tried it. It was a hung jury, and retried it. And so she had to testify. She was 16, I think, at the time, and just the nicest girl. And it was incredibly emotionally traumatic for her. And I remember my closing arguments. I was making my point, and it was, my rebuttal close, which is the more emotional part of the close. And I look over and I say, I'm talking about the victim. I'm pointing at her, and she's looking at me like with a face of, please help, like, please make this happen. And that's where I was like, ooh, and she's crying while I'm talking. And I'm like, I had to stop mid closing. I was like, just a minute, because I can follow my script and have the notes that I'm going to say. But when I see, I'm talking about a real human being, and so much hangs on what's about to happen for her. Do they believe me or do they not believe me? But it ended up being a conviction and a good sentence. And she was just like so overjoyed. But that was one of the early ones where I was like, man, this is some heavy stuff we do here. But the next day, I'm sure I went on to the next case, and it didn't slow me down. I don't have to take days off or anything like that. But some are harder than others.
You 3 have had or have the 3 worst jobs on the planet. Between EMT, infantry, and prosecuting child crimes. It's just the most stressful thing. No, you know what I mean. I don't mean worst. I mean, they're the most consequential. But just for mental health, it just seems so brutal. Just having to face these things.
There are some prosecutors that really don't want to do what I do for that reason, because it can be, so difficult to take home with you. And that's fine, because there's stuff that I don't want to do that they're very good at. There's some charges, some crimes that I don't find as interesting. I enjoy the ability to bring some of the most dangerous people in our community to justice, and just to bring to light. Sometimes it doesn't even matter what the sentence is, just to bring to light, this happened. You can't hide under a rock. You don't get to say it didn't happen. This happened, and just some accountability is like paramount for me. So it's super satisfying.
I also wanted to say that I think that, the 2 most stressful jobs are probably the person who hands out Powerball winnings, because you're always handing out Powerball winnings, but you wish you won them yourself, but every time you got to be handing it out. And then another stressful job is probably murderer. The cops are after you.
It's got to be stressful.
Everybody hates you.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly sort of on the run. So those would be my 2 most stressful jobs: murderer and guy who hands out the Powerball winnings.
Yeah, you got to watch your fingerprints, all that stuff too. No, real question: have you had to deal with people who, there's a decent portion of our country has this sort of default anti-law enforcement bias, and that includes prosecutors. How often would you say that you're up against that, or like you tell someone that you're a prosecutor and they roll their eyes at you and stuff like that? Like, did it bother you initially? Does it still bother you?
Yeah, it bothers me because I think it's gotten, well, I'll say this. One of the effects is that it is now, in my opinion, one of the hardest times to obtain a conviction, certainly since I've ever been working. Not impossible. We still have a very good success rate, but there is that underlying distrust from a small portion of the community. And a few years ago, it was more prevalent such that I think people felt more comfortable speaking vocally. So you'd have people when you're picking a jury in the veneer panel, you're trying to pick them. Does anybody have a problem with law enforcement such that you would not believe their testimony? And you get hands and be like, yeah, I'm just not going to believe a cop. I just don't trust them, which I never would have heard 5-6 years ago. Now, did people have those thoughts and they didn't raise their hand before? I'm sure, for sure. But now they kind of in a good way feel more comfortable of speaking their opinion.
Well, to me, it's analogous to priests. People can just paint them all as pedophiles, and it's this teeny tiny fraction who, priests are revolted by. And, 99.99% of priests probably devote their lives to charity and, living lives of poverty. And then these, just degenerates kind of ruin their,
Asking for a friend, is that the easiest way to get off of or get out of jury duty?
I'm not going to answer that. Well, I mean,
COVID got me out of it.
I'll say this.
I was sitting in the box and got out.
It's actually kind of funny. The last jury trial I had, there was someone coughing next to someone else, and they're like turned away, and they got a mask on, the person that's turned away. And like, does anybody have concerns about sitting on this jury? She's like, I'm sorry, I just got concerns about sitting next to him because I got to go on a trip. I can't get COVID right now. Like, so like things you didn't have to worry about before. But as far as like people saying, there's a great show, Jury Duty, I think it is, on Hulu or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what platform it's on.
Amazon.
But it's Amazon. It's pretty funny. But there's that scene where he says, I'm racist or whatever. I've never had anything like that where somebody like clearly said something outrageous like that to try to get off jury duty. You do have people saying like, oh, I gotta work and no one else can do my job kind of thing. But again, if you want that bad to get out of jury duty, does anybody really want you on there? Because you're either gonna just agree with everyone to get it over with, which is bad for the defense, or you're going to be impossible to listen to anything clearly, which is bad for the prosecution. So, usually I think we do a pretty good job of getting a fair panel, even when they vote not guilty sometimes. I'm like, I get it.
I get simplistic,
we put on a good evidence.
Right? Like with a racist, if somebody is up there in the jury and they say, I'm a racist, however that applies to the person who's on the defense, I mean, a talented prosecutor could work with that. And they'd be like, talented prosecutor would be like, well, obviously not guilty by virtue of, being this race and therefore sort of compelled by their race to act the way that you think. The racist could be your greatest ally in such a situation.
Well, you bring up a good point. Sometimes people will say something or like, oh, they're never going to make it on the jury because of the way they answer that question. But you use that as let's explore that, right? One of the typical ones is, were you ever prosecuted yourself? Were you treated fairly by the government? So what you'll get sometimes is like, yeah, I was prosecuted. I don't like the way I was treated. Do you think that they did anything unethical, unfair? No, they were good. So like, okay, so the government does do the right thing even when you get convicted, that kind of thing. So and it's for the rest of the jury panel. Like you're talking to them. They're your audience. So
the one time I actually got close to actually sitting on a jury, I was the first one picked to go up there. They seat, 12 or with the extras, and then they start asking everybody questions and parsing it down from there. And I just found it funny the line of questioning they got. Like you really got a quick sense of like what the case was going to be. And for this one, it was the defense person was asking me if there was a court order that you weren't supposed to like do X, Y, and Z or go here. Can you think of any reason why you might not do that? And I was like, no, there's a court order. You're not supposed to do that. And everyone else's answers were so kind of dodgy. I kept flying back. I was just like, no. And when the defense's turn to cut people, they like looked right at me and they're like, that guy out of here. I was like, yes.
Yeah. People were trying some shady stuff to get out of it when I had jury duty, but they just called us in by our numbers. And I was in the probably the 8th seat initially, and then people got dismissed. I moved up to the 3rd seat, and that's where I was at the end of selection day 1. And people were trying some just nonsense because they ask, have you or anyone in your family ever been a victim of X, Y, and Z? And people were, overusing the word trauma, just things like this about, just the most third-hand events. And the judge would just take a deep breath and say, do you think that would impact your ability to make a fair decision as to whether or not someone is guilty of what they are accused of doing? No, please sit down.
I have questions for you, Ryan Connor.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I was talking whole time because of all my family between refugees and brothers who were adopted from pretty rough circumstances. I'd be like, yeah, my family members have experienced all these things you're talking about.
Wow. So, what was the crime? What was the case?
It was a domestic violence, but so so it seemed like I was going to be on the jury. I was in the 3rd seat. The next morning, I'm on my way to it, and I'm getting on. It's only like a 12-minute drive or something, and I'm like maybe a quarter of the way there, and all of a sudden, just this extreme fatigue and body ache hit me. This is like a year and a half ago now, and I had to pull over to the side of the road, and I called the I don't know, what's the person who's in charge of jury selection who like talks to the potential jurors. Who's that?
Jury clerk or something?
Something like that, yeah. I called her and I said, I'm on my way there and I'm having these symptoms and I don't know what it is. I hope I'm just like tired or something. But I think I should go to urgent care and get checked out. And I will let you know as soon as I go there. And if they clear me, then I'll be there. And if I was sick, just know I was wearing a mask yesterday. And she goes, great. So I go in, they test me, and it was COVID. I had a horrendous case of it. And she goes, all right, well, we'll mark you down for having served then. So I'm out of the loop for a little while.
Okay, I have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a California jury.
Mm-hmm. LA County. Yeah.
All right. Day 1 of jury selection?
Yeah.
It wasn't a homicide? That's crazy.
Well, it's typically...
How many days?
Well, typically it's 1 day. Typically it is 1 day, but we got started a little late because of something. And then there was I remember there was someone who had some sort of medical condition where they needed some recesses. I'm guessing it was probably like Crohn's or colitis, and they were having flare-ups. And if that person needs to go to the bathroom, then they would recess us all for 15 minutes. So there were a few of those, and it just got backed up where, while our call time was super early, we were probably only in the courtroom for 3 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that the typical is probably a half day for jury selection. Yeah, that's
got to be a very difficult jurisdiction to pick a jury that's going to convict someone, I would think.
That's tough job. That's a good question. It probably varies from district to district, but I don't know. All right, let me ask you this. This is this long shot. Anything funny ever happen in any of these trials? Is there any levity we can provide to this subject?
Yeah, it's weird because sometimes there definitely have been moments like in jury selection where something about our juror. I remember one time, 2 jurors were close to each other, and the defense asked, does anybody know each other in the jury panel? And they're like, yeah, we know each other. Anything about that where you would side with that person just because you know them? And the guy says, no, won't be influenced. And the girl says, yeah, I would definitely side with whatever he says. Like, okay, what's the relationship? That's my dad. We're having Thanksgiving dinner together. Like, okay. And it was a pretty serious sexual assault case. So you'll have that, like people forget why they're there in those moments, and you'll have some levity, not so much during the trial. There are just, truth is stranger than fiction. And there definitely has been like pretty funny cases, but like anything, maybe it's like jokes where there's like a really funny joke you heard one time. You just cannot remember what it is. Right. So I'm sure I've told you guys probably funny things that have happened in court, and I just can't remember them right now. But it's almost never.
You farted
related
during
to
a
the
closing
type of cases.
argument really loud one time. That one time.
Never done that. I've had there was a prosecutor that curtsied by, involuntary curtsy one time. That's a fun story.
Well, thanks for listening to Baggage. This has been a particularly lighthearted episode. Thanks to Ryan Frank, prosecutor extraordinaire.
I know about that.
Anything you want to say on your way out here, Ryan? Anything you want to plug?
I do want to plug the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at missingkids.org. Great resource. They partner with law enforcement all the time about, trying to stem the flow of child pornography. Obviously, missing children, abused children, great resource there. If you are concerned that you see something suspicious with, an individual's behavior, a lot of cases we have is, there's a lot of red flags here. I'm going to call this into CP, Child Protective Services. And that's how some of our cases are generated by third parties because family members aren't reporting it. And also, I'm a domestic violence prosecutor too. That's, on a day-to-day basis with misdemeanors. That's a lot of what I see. So I want to just say to individuals out there that there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And what they can do is tie you in with resources so that you can get a phone that can't be monitored by your, controlling loved one and can't watch your internet history and to help you get out. And unfortunately, those are resources that are much needed. So those are, if anybody's interested to check those out, you can also call the hotline at 1-800-799-7233.
Does that spell anything?
It does.
What does it spell? That's easy to remember.
It does spell something.
Hamburger. No. If you'd like to report a crime against children, call 1-800-HAMBURGER.
It does, actually. It's 1-800-799-SAFE.
799.
So you still got to remember the 799.
Also with this, Dr. Eric Shaw, if you live in the Denver area and you have a child who is either sick or healthy and you want to keep that child healthy, there's no better doctor to see than Dr. Eric Shaw at his practice, Shaw and Shaw.
No, I wish. Pediatrics West in Wheat Ridge in Littleton, Colorado.
Hey, I'm going to plug your book, Ryan, which I just finished.
I loved your book.
It's fantastic, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
It is really good.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's called The Party. It's available on Amazon in multiple formats. And thank you so much for reading it, both of you. I really appreciate it. It's fun. It's fiction. It's sort of political satire. And I hope people like it. Also have a special that's out now. It came out on January 16th. You can just Google it. It's called Ryan Connor Live from DC. You can watch it on Apple TV or Amazon Prime. And I think there's one other service too. And Adrian Bonenberger, you can check out his stuff at Rothbearing Tree. What? Is that the words?
Rathbearing Tree.
You can check out Adrian Bonenberger's stuff at Rathbearing Tree. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
I don't know what the word. I don't know what the words are. I got to see that written down.
Rathbearing, like you can bear an apple. Rathbearing Tree.
Rathbearing Tree. It's a tree that bears wrath.
Yes.
Okay. I think the listeners need to know that too, where they're not going to find it. They're going to be like, what is he saying? Well, Adrian clearly had to leave a few minutes ago, and he's a delight, but he did have to go. Hey, thanks for listening to Baggage. Check your luggage at the gate. I don't know. We don't have a sign-off line, but...
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks for listening, everybody. Music for Baggage provided by Quincy Ledbetter. You can find his stuff at qledbetter.com. Graphics provided by Megan Weaver. You can find her at meganweaverart.com. Special thanks to our premium members for their support. You can become a premium member by clicking subscribe in your Apple Podcast app or by visiting thebaggagepodcast.com/support to sign up or to gift a membership to someone. A percentage of all proceeds go to charity. If you have any questions, comments, or a good story to share, please email us at thebaggagepodcast@gmail.com.